Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining me. My name is Bradley Shaw, and tonight I'm talking with Robert Barclay, the new author of The Diary of Katy Yehonala. Good evening, Robert. How are you?
Very well, Bradley. Thanks for the invitation.
I have to ask, did I pronounce that title right, or was it Yehonala?
It was closer than a lot of people do.
It's a very interesting word. Why the name? Do you have any reference to that word or name?
I do, and it's a bit of an unfortunate one. You know, the story is basically about three Chinese women, but historically they're descended from the old Empress Cixi, and she died in 1908, I think, somewhere around there.
Wow.
And she was the last Qing Empress of China before the communists and the rest of them came along. And she came from a clan or tribe called the Yehonalas. Mm-hmm. So I was if I wanted to write about the ancestors of Cixi, I was stuck with the surname. I find it hard to pronounce too, if there's any comfort to you. But it is quite well known, and there's a lot of stuff written about her. She's quite misunderstood. Yeah. And because I've lived in China for so long and in Asia for so long, the idea of writing a story about Chinese women growing the way China has grown and through the changes China has gone through seemed like just the most wonderful idea for a story. But it did bring along the drawback of the awkward surname.
Yes. No, that's good. So you were in China. You were writing this story and living in the culture as well, living and immersing in that.
Well, yes. I grew up in England. We came to Australia as migrants back when I was 17 or 18. And I loved the traveling so much that I joined the Navy and saw the world.
Oh, well done.
And I spent 8-9 years traveling around, mostly in Asia.
Yeah.
And when I left, I just carried on traveling. I traveled, wasn't working, and I worked all around the world for the last 30 years. And most recently, I spent 3.5 years in China and Cambodia and Indonesia and those kinds of places. Yeah. I love it there. I love the culture. I love the people. I love the history. I love the stories. So it was just so natural for me to write a story about that part of the world. I know people there, and so few people really know much about it and what went on there. It just seemed like a unique, if you like, a unique opportunity to write about something very few people knew much about. And put it into a story about these three women. Yeah.
No, it's beautifully written. You've done it very well. So is this your first novel book or this form, or have you written a lot in your life as well?
I suppose I've written all my life, not books, but almost everywhere I've gone, every job that I've had, it finished up having a very large component about writing. I suppose it even goes back to my English village school with the teachers there. I always found myself in jobs where I finished up either writing, reviewing, presenting words in English. And I love the English language. Yeah. And I think writing just came naturally to me because I love the language so much. And I just fell into it over the years. I wrote my first book when I was probably 12 years old. It was about 5 pages, as I remember, and it was called The Whipping Post. And I was 12 years old, and I wrote it as sort of an outpouring of my puberty to a girl about the same age. And I edited this thing, handwritten, of course, back in those days. Finished up like a spider's web of stuff. I don't remember whether I actually ever gave it to her, but my lingering memory is thinking, how the hell does somebody write a whole book? My 5 pages seem to be about it.
That's right.
Didn't get much past that. And I dabbled, back then I dabbled in poetry. I'm a very introspective kind of person. Yeah. So I dabbled poetry, possibly a little bit, none survived, thank goodness. But it was possibly a little bit better than the Roses Are Red stuff, but not by much.
So architecturally, was it hard to learn the art of novel writing, of really constructing this story? Did you say evolving it from 5 pages up to 500, like really trying to put a book in place? What was the learning process for you as a writer?
I kind of had 68 years to make the transition.
Develop it?
to go through the process. But I don't think it was. Growing up in business, writing proposals and things, they tend to be very long documents anyway. So I'm quite a verbose person.
Yeah.
Writing lots of words or speaking lots of words comes reasonably easy to me.
Yeah.
And I grew up in England without any sort of social media, any television, much of this kind of stuff. So we had to make our own entertainment.
Yeah.
And I remember being about 5 or 6 years old in a small village school. And we had this typical English teacher, bun hair, pince-nez glasses, and those kind of things. And she was an English grammar Nazi and a spelling Nazi.
Yeah.
And she would make us write stories and stand up in class and read them. So I grew up, even from 6 or 7 years old, learning to tell stories, read stories out.
Yeah.
And in a very strict school, English environment, where words like bunches and other sort of American collective nouns didn't exist, You didn't have a bunch of flowers, you had a bouquet or a posy. So I grew up with language.
Proper language, yeah.
So it wasn't always about writing, but it was about language. And I found myself just putting it down on paper.
Yeah.
I probably have some different ways I write than most people, but it was a natural thing for me to do. I love the language. I agonize over sentences sometimes, even over words. So getting this out to, 90-odd thousand words wasn't the challenge.
No.
The challenge was going off down rabbit holes and writing endless chapters of stuff that nobody'd be interested in.
Yeah.
So
that's the challenge.
90,000 was the tough part.
Yeah. And cutting back, putting out the story and really fine-tuning it. So with the story in question, with this particular book, was it the characters that gave you the sense of the story, or did you have a story and then you wanted to fit your characters into it? How did you model the writing of this book particularly?
Well, it started with a time period, and the time period was the 70s. Now, it was an amazing time in the world. In Western cultures, we were reading stuff like The Joy of Sex, and the Beatles broke up, and Gough Whitlam came along, Apple came along, Microsoft got started, all of those kind of things. So huge things happened, and the Vietnam War was on as well.
Yeah.
And during that time, I was overseas, I was in Asia, and there was something else going on then. Two of the greatest tragedies in the history of the world were happening on Australia's doorstep. One was in China, and it was Mao's Cultural Revolution during the 70s. And that and the famines, it killed more people than World War I. 20-odd million people died. Most people don't even know that. And just across the border in Cambodia, Pol Pot was running his killing fields exercise.
Yeah.
Killed off about 2 million people there, 30% of the population, basically. And a few Australians got killed too. And one of those countries, China, grew to be a powerhouse in the world. And that transition is really interesting. And Cambodia turned out to be one of the poorest countries in the world. It's now the hub of a really evil industry, trafficking children for sex.
Yeah.
And I was there at the time, and I saw Pol Pot stuff. And I've lived in China for years and years. And I know Chinese people. And the history and my curiosity about that time, it's lived with me, and watching and seeing the kids going through those tragedies, it kind of inspired every word that I write since that time. In fact, I have a charity which works in that. So, that's where it came from. And I knew a woman who went through that time, who went through the Cultural Revolution, got sent off to the Gulag, and came back. And I was with her quite some time. And so that was the germ of the story. I didn't want to write a story about the history of Mao or Pol Pot, but I think the backstory of those times was so fascinating, and so unknown by most people.
And there's such a historical relevance of cultivation that really reminisces in the story to the characters' experiences too.
Yeah, and it seemed to me that the three women, they're quite different. They're all three generations of the same family, and they mirror the changes that have gone on in that part of the world over probably 30 or 40 years. From when they're born to when they go through their various exercises.
Can I ask the question of why you selected women as your main protagonists, as you wanted to put the story? I mean, to be a man and to write about women alone is very challenging, but you put three generations in three different contexts of periods to make it a very unique story. So why did you give yourself that challenge as well? And I guess, was there anyone you modeled them off? You've obviously known a lot of Chinese women in life.
Katie is actually modeled on a real person, at least in the early part of the book she is. Now, actually, a lot of people ask me, how can you write as a woman? How can you write as three women? Well, it's not as hard writing about three Asian women as it might be writing about three Western women. They've grown up in different worlds. Nowadays, the last generation, it's much harder, I would imagine. But back then, there were, I shouldn't generalize too much, but there are stereotypes of in that culture. It's this filial piety thing where you have this almost military discipline of reverence. You have 5,000 years of conditioning for demureness in the women. So, and they are Chinese women generally behave in much the same way up until quite recently. They look after their husbands, they look after their families, they're very nurturing, they believe in destiny and fate and all of these kinds of things. Pretty much you can throw whatever you like at them and they'll get up, dust off and keep going. Chinese women are amazing. I describe them as steel rods wrapped in silk.
That makes sense.
So in that sense, it wasn't that hard to write as women. And I didn't go too far outside of the stereotypes until they got older. Because I wanted them to grow, I wanted them to change, and I wanted them to integrate into Western culture. So that was the harder part. But the childhood part was actually quite easy because the story, there are millions of stories just like that.
And so was there a challenge in like, I mean, what was the biggest challenge, I guess is my question. What was the biggest challenge you faced with writing this novel? Not only was it really your first big story attempt, what else other challenge to you? Was it, as you said, characterizations? Was it, did you suffer a lot of writer's block? What elements did you find difficult?
I think there were a couple of challenges. I have this idea, this belief, which I learned as I was writing, that the characters that you write are actually personifications of yourself. Now, I really believe that, even the women, every person that I've written about, every character in each of my books, they're me. Now, I can see myself in them, and maybe they're representing things that I've lost, things that I dream I could be one day, and so on. So I'm living my life through my characters. I think a lot of writers do that.
You relate to them.
Yes, or even more than that. I think you invest a lot of your energy and your life and your emotions into them. And I think
that's important too. As an authentic writer.
Cry. If they don't make you cry sometimes, then maybe you're not investing enough of your energy into them. And they should make you smile too, obviously. Novels are true after all. But I think the biggest challenge, I think there were a couple. The first one was the emotional one, particularly with Katy.
Yeah.
You know, I was constantly, because she had to grow, I was constantly challenged by wanting to save her from herself. You know, I needed her to grow, and sometimes I had to put her in situations where she was going to get hurt. And I found that very difficult. That was a really tough thing to write about that.
Yeah.
And one of the ways that I dealt with it, intended in, because Clara became a success story. So every time I had to put Katy through the ringer and then give her a shake, and when she stumbled, I had Clara there who was taking on the world. Good. So, but the emotional challenge was extremely difficult in some places, particularly, you know, in her growing up years.
Yeah.
She sort of found her feet emotionally in a relationship when she didn't know what she was doing. She got hurt, and that was tough to write.
Yeah. As in writing it as a woman, or as in writing it as in general? Like, was it hard? Did you have to get women's input, like really understand the emotion of the context?
Yeah, I think we all have a feminine side. You know, we might be a male, but there's a female element in everybody, the same as the male element in women. And I think when you write emotionally about anything, you put that part of yourself into it. So you put your feminine side into writing emotional aspects in the female character writing about. So they become very real. They don't make you, you're not writing hard enough. Yeah. And she did from time to time. I had to stop writing and go do something else, or I didn't want to change. I wanted her to really grow, and I needed her to suffer and stumble and pick herself up and keep going, because I knew that's the nature of Chinese women. They get up and they keep going. Yeah. And she had to do that. Yeah. The other big challenge was the writing one. When you're writing well or profusely, it's really hard to stop. And because I love language, I love the words, and I love telling the stories. Yeah. And when you start telling stories, you know, the word count grows exponentially. It does. So the challenge in writing for me was when I was being more productive, I'd find myself going off at tangents and down rabbit holes, telling parts of the story which really weren't parts of the story. They were just fun to write. Yeah. And because you get caught up in the storytelling, it tends to be some of your best writing. Yes. And you don't want, when you come to looking at the book and deciding what you're going to take out, that's my best part. That's right. You were saying, Robert, that has nothing to do with the story. I know, but you like the way it's written. That's right. I love the way it's written. So but there's no story, mate. I find it very hard to be a self-published author. Yeah. Because I couldn't bring myself to... Don't have, you need the discretion, the objectivity. You need I couldn't put a red pen through it. I finish up with something the size of the Bible, you know. Well, that's it. But that's interesting you say that, because if I'm not mistaken, there's a sequel to this book as well. So the evolution kept rolling through to the story's incubus. Is that what's coming up for you as well? Well, it did. And I'm grateful to Katy, to Clara for that, because when she came along, it also said the idea of these two somewhat unique, naive heroes who could go on to greater adventures. Yeah. And so the first book is not a murder mystery. It's kind of a sort of a sweeping saga about two women and growing up in strange times and taking on things and overcoming and fighting and falling and so on. Katy does get married. I say that at the start of the book. But the end of the book there's an ending in the book which leads into a second story when Katy and Clara tend to come together and they turn into murder mysteries. So I'm enjoying the genre so much. Yeah. The second book is finished. Yeah. And the third book is about a third of the way along.
There you go.
I want to write 3 or 4 books
Mm.
about Katy and Clara adventures,
Yep.
2 kind of pseudo sleuths who go about.
Oh, good.
It's basically around the whole idea of child trafficking and these undercurrents.
Trying to stop,
that kind of stuff.
Trying to stop
And
the crimes.
raising awareness of it and telling stories about those kind of things, so that people can learn about the issues, so they can learn about that part of the world too.
Good. Well done. No, that's good. So with writing, do you write a lot? Do you write every day? Do you write once a week? Do you set time aside? Is it sort of like because you're retired now, so is it sort of like a hobby, part-time job you've created yourself and trying to build the portfolio?
I don't know about a part-time job, Bradley. I think it's quite easy to be a full-time job. I've tried putting aside time each day, and I've tried, let's try 1,000 words a day or whatever it happens to be. I can't do that. I'm just no good at it. And I have other things that I do, so I don't get I don't get writer's block. I don't actually believe it exists. I think all it is it's a nice little label that says you're distracted, and I get distracted. By classical music. And I'm teaching myself classical piano. Mainly because Clara herself is a classical pianist.
Good.
And that's why she is, because it's so But along the way, I'm teaching myself to do that. So I get distracted by that for a day or two sometimes. I want to learn a new melody and so on. And once my attention or motivation is diverted, I can't write.
You got to go focused. I
have to go and focus on something else. So when I say I don't believe in writer's block, I just mean that motivation gets sidetracked. Sometimes you can't write because you're lonely, you need somebody to speak to.
You can't get your thoughts into the moment as well.
So when I write, I have to be 100% tuned in to doing it.
That's good.
Otherwise nothing happens. And I have to do it in the morning too.
Yeah, fair enough. Most people are morning or night times. People have different schedules in their mind of how their body functions. So mornings is yours? I mean, you work in the morning?
Yeah, I work in the mornings. So, I've learned that if you wake up at 1 o'clock in the morning with a great idea, you better go and write it down, because it won't be there when you wake up at 6.
Have a pen, they say, have a pen by your bed, like a pen and paper.
I don't like get up by myself, so not disturb anybody. So sometimes I get up at 2 o'clock in the morning and write. And I'll work through till I've had enough. But by about 5 or 6 o'clock in the afternoon, I've had it. I just write.
It's a big
rubbish.
day.
Well, even if I didn't write in the morning, what I write in the evening is rubbish. I'd sooner just go and edit something or write a blog or do something.
Just not think as much. I know in the heavy afternoon, it's not hard. I like it too, just turn my brain off. But that's good. So with the writing and with the process that you've experienced so far, now that you're coming up to the release of the book, what are you hoping the feedback is going to be from your readers who get a hold of this wonderful book?
Well, obviously, I hope the feedback's going to be wonderful, and people will enjoy the story. I wrote the book to raise, for a number of reasons. One was to raise issues about trafficking, because I think it's a hugely important, misunderstood, unknown issue in society. So I want to weave my stories around that, so that people will understand that not everybody lives the same way as our kids do. Some live pretty awful lives. I didn't want to stand on a soapbox. I wanted to write a story.
An honest experience of it as well, like in your even fiction, but just having that element of a real character in the moment.
So I hope people will get something out of it from a real humanist point of view, a greater understanding of the world, and learn something about some. I want all of my stories to have something in it for everyone. For example, for those people who like to look sort of behind the story.
Yeah.
In the diary book, they can see a metaphor, for example, of China and Cambodia growing over that same period.
Yeah.
So the three women are metaphors for China, if you want to sort of scratch away and dig it. It doesn't take away from the story, but it's there for interest for those that like to find deeper meanings in something.
Yeah.
So I hope people will read my books and look a little beyond the characters to the backstories that they're written into.
Yeah, I think they will. I think you've created that environment and that narration very well. The browse is very good, so it's very easy and enjoyable. So, and for everybody watching, thank you for watching. The Diary of Katy Yehonala. Is that how you say it?
Yehonala.
By Robert Barclay is available as of November. Everywhere books are sold, and we do ask you can buy it anywhere you generally purchase your books, but we do ask you to support your local bookshops. Go in and ask for the book if you can, and hopefully grab a copy and just read this and enjoy a wonderful tale, the first of more to come. And well, thank you, Robert, for your evening and for talking to us, telling us all about this wonderful story.
Okay,
and everybody,
thank you.
You're most welcome. Thank you for watching, everybody, and please go and grab this wonderful book. It's available everywhere books are sold as of November. And thank you again.
Now.